Have you ever felt burned out from your running? In this video, I want to differentiate between feeling burned out and overtraining syndrome, and also give you some really effective strategies at preventing burnout so that you never have to deal with this pesky problem in your training. All right, first, let's be clear that overtraining syndrome and feeling burned out are not the same thing. First, overtraining syndrome is a real physiological problem that runners experience where their body is not recovering as much as it should. And the training stress that these athletes are experiencing is so high that with every additional training stress, their fitness declines and they are less and less able to properly recover and then adapt to whatever type of running workout that they're doing. And the only solution to overtraining syndrome is to rest, is to take time away from running, especially anything very difficult like a long run, a race, or a faster workout. Maybe for some runners, if their overtraining syndrome isn't very severe, you can just do a couple easy runs per week and really just let your physiology get back to neutral. This is actually a great opportunity to use a test like Inside Tracker to understand if any of your biomarkers are out of whack, and they'll give you personal ranges for the couple dozen biomarkers that they test. Burnout is a little bit different. Burnout is more psychological. Burnout is mental. Burnout is when you don't want to engage with your training anymore. Burnout is when you just don't really want to get up early to go for that run. You don't feel driven. You don't feel ambitious. You don't feel motivated to go running. And this can often happen to runners who race a lot or who aren't taking enough breaks with their running. Burnout is what happens when you don't get enough psychological rest and recovery in your training. It's when your training cycle is simply too long and you always feel on and are constantly trying to run more frequently, to run faster. That takes a toll on your psyche. And if you're not careful, that burnout can really ruin your season. So if we want to avoid burnout, what do? How do we actually get through an entire training cycle without feeling that mental malaise? We want to stay driven and excited about our training all the time so that we can keep pushing forward and get ourselves to that next level. First thing we should definitely recognize is that running is a cyclical sport. Everything that happens in running has to happen in cycles. And that cycle really starts with a period of rest, period of time off from running, and then you would start some easy running. Many would consider this base training. Then you start adding in harder workouts and you have your more difficult competition phase of training where you're running hard workouts, you start running races, then you have your championship time of the season where you might have your goal race after a taper, and then the cycle begins again. After your goal race, you take more time off, you recharge, you get your engines back to neutral, and then the cycle continues. You start some more easy running and you keep progressing with your training in that way. Now, these training cycles really shouldn't be more than 16 to 24 weeks, depending on how intense they are and how much base training is really included at the very beginning of this cycle. So if you're someone who might be training for a marathon, you probably want to use a 16 to 20 week training plan. If you're training for an ultra marathon and it may be your first marathon or first ultra marathon or your first go at an even longer distance ultra, it might be a really good idea to use a longer training cycle so that your training can be a bit more gradual. As long as you're still excited about the goal and you're still driven to get out there and train for a longer period of time, there's really nothing wrong with that, as long as the intensity is kept in check. But for most athletes, that 16 to 20 week cycle is really the gold standard when it comes to how long you want to spend training formally for a race. Any longer than that, you're going to start to get burned out. This video is sponsored by Inside Tracker, our newest partner for the YouTube channel, and I couldn't be more excited. They are an ethical company. They are a company that I've been using personally for years, and they're one of the most reputable blood testing companies in the country. Inside Tracker tests your blood very simply. They look at over 40 different biomarkers, from stress hormones like cortisol to testosterone levels and vitamin D, also that you know what's going on inside your body. So you can tell if you're undertraining, you're overtraining, you're optimally training, or if you just have any other health issues that might be going on that might be impacting your running. And like I said, I've been using them for years. I've gotten numerous ultimate tests, and I'm about to get my third, and I added on the DNA kit. This is gonna be really special for me just to get a more in-depth look at what's going on inside me so that I know if there are any red flags that I have to address. And that part of the whole procedure is why I love Inside Tracker, because you know what they do? They don't just give you a report showing you how your markers might be in the zone or outside the zone. They tell you how to improve them. So if you are too low or too high with any of these metrics, they give you science-backed ways to improve upon them through diet, exercise, or lifestyle changes. So I'm super happy about this partnership. And if you go to insidetracker.com/strengthrunning, use code strengthrunning, you're gonna get 25% off any test that they have. This is a great offer, and I'm really excited to partner with this company, so I hope you take advantage of it. That's insidetracker.com/strengthrunning, and use code strengthrunning to save 25% off on any test. Okay, strategy one to prevent burnout is to make sure we are always operating in cycles. That builds in the rest and recovery into your long-term training cycle. The other thing that you can do is insert recovery weeks into that same training cycle where there's a reduction in mileage, there's a reduction in intensity, and the goal is really to recover even more and get even more adaptations from all that hard work that you've done. It can be really great to take that psychological break from hard training, so by the end of the week, you're actually a little bit more excited to get back on the horse, to continue with progression and pushing yourself to do even more. Because burnout is mostly psychological, we really want to make sure that we are mentally engaged with our training during the entire training cycle. And part of that means having fun. Part of that means keeping your training light, not taking yourself or your training so seriously that it becomes this huge chore. And some of the best ways to do that is, number one, run with friends. Do it regularly, at least once a week. Get out there with some buddies and go for some fun runs where you're laughing, you're having fun, you're not really focused on your pace or your splits or your effort. And these runs will really fill your cup up. They are so just internally satisfying. You're gonna have a great time. You're gonna barely feel like you were out there running. You're just gonna feel like you had a great time with your friends and you spent an hour joking around, telling stories, and supporting one another. That will definitely keep you more mentally engaged with your training. Next, let's make sure we're running in some really fun places every once in a while. Now, I know I'm a little privileged. I get to run here in Colorado where it's absolutely beautiful and we have some of the most amazing trails in the country, but I guarantee wherever you live, there are beautiful places to run. Open up Google Maps and look for any green areas. Right now, I'm in the middle of Denver and I'm in some open space parks, and it's so much nicer to run here than just to run on city streets or endless loops around my neighborhood. Find somewhere that's invigorating to you. Maybe you don't run under a bridge like I'm walking right now. Might get a little dicey under there. But find somewhere where there's a lot of nature, where you can see a lot of trees. Studies have shown that this really helps with a lot of mental issues. So if you are feeling burned out by your training, go find some good trails to run, some good off-road surfaces, and that is really gonna recharge the batteries. You know, if you are feeling burned out, one of the best ways to reduce that feeling and get yourself back on track is with a very short break from running. Even 3 or 4 days, which is not really enough to negatively impact your fitness, but it is enough to impact your psychology. It's enough to make you miss running a little bit, to make you want to get back on the training bandwagon and start doing the harder workouts, the long runs, and maybe some of those tune-up races that you have coming up. So if you're feeling a little bit like you just don't want to do this anymore, take a short break. And if that still doesn't work, maybe you take a couple weeks where you're not doing any very difficult workouts. The combination of a little bit of rest and a little bit of time away from very intense training sessions is going to leave you feeling so much more refreshed and likely not burned out. Like so many problems we runners face, burnout is one that we can address and one that we can prevent. If we can build some of these strategies into our training, using cycles, making sure that we're running with friends, using recovery weeks, running in nature, and taking a little bit of time off from running and definitely time away from intensity, if we are starting to feel some of those signs of burnout, then we are going to be much more ambitious, driven, motivated runners. And that is where the magic happens.